Have you ever stopped to think that the same hands that once held a gun can now hold bricks and help build something new? These hands, which once bore the weight of war, which once felt the metallic cold of destruction, now find a new purpose. It's impossible not to get goosebumps imagining the contrast between the battlefield and the sound of hammers building hope. What happens to a soldier when the roar of explosions gives way to the silence of memories? Is it possible to transform pain into healing, guilt into redemption, and fear into the strength to start over? What you'll discover now may surprise you and, who knows, change the way you view life after war. Imagine this soldier returning home, his uniform sweaty, his body weary, and his eyes filled with stories no one has heard. Each step he takes feels heavy, as if the ground is still covered in the dust of battle. And deep down, a question lingers in his mind. Will I ever be who I was again? Have you ever experienced this, that moment when the past seems to shout louder than the present? For many veterans, this is reality, a silent war that continues even after the last shot is fired. But something happens. A spark of hope appears where there seemed only darkness. It could be an outstretched hand, an unexpected embrace, an opportunity to start over. It's at this point that the story begins to change, and what seemed like the end becomes the beginning of something new. Stay with me until the end, because the transformation you'll experience today is one that makes us rethink what's possible when we find a new purpose. The invisible scars, the ones no one sees, are often the hardest to heal. But when someone decides to use pain as fuel to rebuild, something extraordinary happens. It's as if every tear shed becomes the cement for a new life, and you'll realize that this story isn't just about one soldier. It's about all of us who have had to face internal battles and learn to transform destruction into something meaningful. The sound of gunfire will become the sound of tools. The echo of war will give way to the laughter of children running down a paved street, and hands once trained to destroy will now build something lasting. Have you ever imagined that perhaps the darkest parts of your life could become the foundation of something greater? This journey will show you that it is possible. And it's precisely at this point that everything begins to take shape, when the soldier takes the first step out of the shadow of war and begins to write a new story. And what happens from here is something you need to see. And perhaps, as you listen to this story, something inside you will begin to stir. Maybe you know someone who's been through something similar, or perhaps you're fighting your own silent battles. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what has touched you most so far. I want to know how this story resonates in your life, because every comment helps us transform this space into a true community of hope and resilience. When you like the video, YouTube understands that this type of message needs to reach more people who are also seeking strength to start over. And if you subscribe to the channel, you'll continue to be part of this journey, following each new story of transformation we bring here. Your participation is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of content. So, if you feel this message needs to be heard by more people, support this movement with your like, your comment, and your subscription. It's as if you're helping to add another brick to this construction of hope. And speaking of construction, what follows will show how this soldier began, step by step, to build something new from the ruins. His name is Michael. In the United States, this name is common, but his story is unlike any other. He was born in a small town in rural Texas, surrounded by cornfields in a community where everyone knew each other by name. Since childhood, Michael dreamed of being someone who made a difference, someone who could protect others. He grew up watching his father work hard in the auto repair shop, and his mother taking care of the house and the neighbors. He was a boy who ran barefoot down the street, played football in school, and dreamed of joining the army. At the time, the idea of serving his country felt like a calling, almost a life mission, and it was this desire for honor and purpose that led him far from home, straight to the battlefield. But war changes people. Michael saw things no 19-year-old should ever see. He quickly learned to make life or death decisions, and each choice seemed to leave an invisible scar on his mind. It was the sound of helicopters at night, the attack warnings, the screams echoing in the silence of the desert. He was trained to be strong, to show no fear, but deep inside, fear became a constant companion. This is where the hidden truth begins that many people fail to see. The greatest impact of war is not always in the visible wounds, but in what no one sees, in the battles fought in the silence of the mind. When Michael returned to the United States, the country was celebrating, but he felt no desire to celebrate. The flag on the porch, the barbecue his neighbors had prepared to welcome him, None of it seemed to fit the new version of himself he carried. His body was at home, but his mind was still there, on the other side of the world. Every louder noise in the street reminded him of explosions. Every slam of a door made his heart race as if he were back on the battlefield. He wondered if he would ever be who he was again, or if that light, dreamy version of the Texas boy had been buried in the dust of war. Michael isolated himself for a time. He spent hours sitting on the porch, watching the sky change colors and feeling an emptiness that was hard to explain. It wasn't just missing the friends who remained. It was a feeling that something in him had been ripped away. That's when he began writing in an old notebook he found in the basement. It wasn't meant for anyone to read. It was simply a way to release the weight inside. Each word was a brick removed from the walls he had built to protect himself, and it was with this simple habit that a slow, almost imperceptible transformation began, but one that would change everything. Over time, Michael accepted a friend's invitation to join a veterans support group. At first, he didn't think he needed it, but when he heard another soldier tell his story and discuss the same memories that haunted him at night, something inside him snapped. For the first time, he felt he wasn't alone. It was as if I'd found a glimpse behind the scenes of a reality no one spoke about out loud. There, each carried invisible scars, but together they began to see a path to rebuilding their lives. These meetings opened the door to new decisions. Michael began helping other newly arrived veterans, teaching them that it's possible to start over even when you feel like you're no longer strong. He learned that every act of service, no matter how small, had the power to heal. His transformation didn't happen overnight, but with each step the pain became less suffocating, and the more he helped, the more he discovered about himself, as if he were rediscovering his identity. The impact of this was so profound that it inspired not only the veterans in the group, but also entire families in the community. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because understanding who Michael is just the beginning. His journey will reveal how seemingly simple choices can redefine the course of an entire life, and how the weight of the past can transform into strength to build something new. Comment below. I want to see where this story goes. Michael always said that the war doesn't end when you leave the battlefield. It continues inside your head. At night, even back in his bed in a quiet Texas home, he would wake up sweaty, his heart racing, as if he were still in the midst of an attack. The sound of a truck passing by on the street could make his entire body freeze, and the mere creak of a door would send him instinctively searching for an exit, as if he needed to escape. It's strange to think that for someone who had faced so much, the silence of home could be more frightening than the sound of explosions. But that's exactly what happened. The silence brought back all the voices, the screams, the images he wished he could erase. Neighbors tried to be kind, asking how he was, but they couldn't tell what was going on inside. He smiled back, said, "I'm fine," but inside, he struggled not to fall apart. This is the hidden truth about many veterans in the United States. Behind the flag waving on the porch, there are battles no one sees. Michael felt trapped in a cycle of memories that kept repeating, as if trapped in a movie that played endlessly. Sometimes he would spend hours in the backyard watching the sunset and trying to find a sense of peace that always seemed to elude him. Regret was also a constant visitor. He remembered the decisions he had to make on the battlefield. Swift, instinctive decisions that saved lives but also carried weight. He wondered if he could have done something differently, if he could have prevented certain losses. This emotional burden was like an invisible weight on his shoulders, and even surrounded by family and friends, he felt alone. There were days when he would isolate himself completely, turning off his cell phone and avoiding all contact, as if the world around him were a noise he couldn't bear. This sense of isolation began to affect everything: sleep, eating, patience with family. Small everyday things became triggers. A neighborhood party, fireworks on the 4th of July, which for many was a cause for celebration, were vivid reminders of the battlefield for Michael. The emotional toll was so strong that he avoided leaving the house on those dates. The country was celebrating freedom, but he felt trapped in his own body. And it's at this point that his mindset begins to shift, albeit slowly. Michael began to realize he couldn't continue living this way. He knew he needed to face these memories, not just try to forget them. This was one of the hardest moments, admitting he needed help. In the United States, there's still a lot of stigma surrounding mental health, especially for veterans who were trained to be strong and resilient through any pain. But it was this seemingly simple decision that opened the door to a healing journey. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, Because what Michael experienced next was a series of revelations that transformed not only the way he saw the world, but the way he saw himself. This part of the story shows the most difficult part of the entire journey. That moment when you have to face your own reflection head-on and decide whether to remain stuck in the past or take a step forward. He comments, "I feel that weight too." That night seemed like all the others, but there was something different in the air. Michael was alone in the room, the television flickering in the background, showing news footage of conflicts in another part of the world. The images brought back memories he'd spent months trying to push to the back of his mind. His heart began to race and anguish gripped his entire body. He was breathing rapidly, his hands trembling, and suddenly it felt like he was back in the desert, hearing the distant sound of gunfire. It was such an intense crisis that he had to sit on the floor to keep from falling. In that moment, the weight of everything he carried seemed unbearable. He felt on the verge of losing control, as if his mind were about to shatter. That was the breaking point. Michael realized he couldn't continue living that way, trapped in a cycle of fear and pain. For the first time, he admitted to himself that he needed help. It was a silent but powerful moment, because it required more courage than any battle he had ever faced. In the United States, many veterans hide this moment, fearing to appear weak. But for Michael, that was the moment when a new mindset began to emerge. He no longer wanted to be just a survivor. He wanted to truly live. Later that night, he picked up his phone and wrote a message to the friend who had invited him to the support group. His hands were shaking, and he deleted and rewrote it several times before sending it. "I need to go tomorrow." This small decision was the first step toward something bigger. It's curious how sometimes transformation begins with such simple gestures, but for him, it was like walking through a door that had been locked for years. The next day, Michael went to the town's community center. The building was small, red brick with an American flag waving over the entrance. He paused for a moment, took a deep breath, and entered. Inside, he found a circle of chairs occupied by other veterans, some older, some as young as he. At first, he was silent, just listening. But when one of the men shared a story that sounded like his own, Michael felt something break inside. These were no longer just memories carried in silence. They were words, emotions, revelations finding space to exist. It was then that something unexpected happened. Michael, who had sworn never to talk about certain things, heard himself expressing his true feelings for the first time. The words came out shakily, sometimes broken by tears, but each sentence seemed to lift a weight he'd carried for years. The room was silent. No one interrupted him. When he finished, another veteran stood, crossed the circle, and placed a hand on his shoulder. There were no speeches, just that simple gesture that said, "You are not alone." And it was in that gesture that Michael felt the first spark of hope. The impact of that night changed everything. Not instantly, but it was as if someone had turned on a small light at the end of the tunnel. From then on, Michael began attending the meetings every week. He still faced nightmares, still had difficult days, but now there was a safe space to talk about it. And each time he told his story, something inside him grew stronger. It was as if he were rebuilding not only his mind, but also his heart. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic because this turning point paved the way for decisions that would lead Michael to completely transform his life, giving new meaning to what he had experienced. Right there, I felt this turning point. After that first night when Michael managed to open his heart, something inside him began to change. It wasn't as if the ghosts of the past had suddenly disappeared, but the feeling of being completely alone began to fade. At the next meeting, he was greeted with hugs and looks from people who truly understood what he was feeling. There was no judgment, just people who carried the same invisible scars and who, somehow, were finding ways to move forward. It was in this environment that Michael heard about a social project that was helping veterans rebuild not only their own lives, but also the lives of entire families in vulnerable situations. At first, he hesitated. The idea of leaving home and getting involved in something so hands-on seemed daunting. After all, just the thought of being on a construction site, with loud noises and constant movement, already made his body react with tension. But something about the proposal resonated with him. It was as if a silent voice said, "Maybe this is your chance to transform what destroyed you into something that builds." After a few days of reflection, Michael made the decision to participate. This choice became a turning point, a real step toward a new mindset. When he first arrived at the site, he was greeted by a volunteer who was also a veteran. The man smiled, shook his hand firmly, and said, "Here, Every hammer blow is a form of healing. That phrase stuck in Michael's mind. That day he spent hours helping build walls, mix cement, and organize materials. At first he was tense, observing every sound around him, but gradually he realized the energy of the place was different. There was no rush, no shouts of command, just people coming together to create something new. The impact was profound. It was as if each brick laid was a piece of his own life being rebuilt. During breaks, Michael chatted with other volunteers and discovered stories as intense as his own. There were veterans who had lost everything, fathers trying to reconnect with their children, mothers coping with the absence of their husbands. Each conversation revealed a hidden truth about human strength. No one has to face everything alone. This was one of the most defining moments of his journey, because it was there that he understood that asking for help was not a sign of weakness, but of courage. The following days became lighter. Michael began to look forward to each project meeting, not just for the manual labor but for the sense of purpose it brought. He returned home physically tired but with a slightly lighter heart. It was unlike anything he had experienced since returning from the war. The memories still came. The nightmares still surfaced from time to time, but now there was a flame burning within him that would not be extinguished so easily. This transformation also began to impact his family. His mother said his smile was returning, and his father said it had been a long time since he'd seen that sparkle in his son's eyes. Michael realized that by rebuilding himself, he was also helping to rebuild the relationships around him. The journey wasn't easy, but each small victory was celebrated as a milestone. He felt like he was regaining something he thought he'd lost forever, the ability to dream about the future. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because this new phase of Michael's life will reveal how the simple act of service became the key to completely transforming the course of his story. Leave a comment below. I need this flame. The first few days after joining the project were the most challenging for Michael. Although he was surrounded by people who truly welcomed him, an invisible barrier still kept him on edge. He arrived early, observed his surroundings, and listened to every sound and movement as if something could go wrong at any moment. It was as if his body was still in combat mode, even though he knew he was safe. This difficulty in relaxing was a constant reminder that transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's a process, and each step must be taken patiently. Michael didn't trust easily. He'd learned during his years of service that trusting someone could be costly. So even while helping build houses, carrying planks and mixing cement, he kept my heart closed. He spoke little, answering only when necessary. At night, when he returned home, his mind still worked nonstop. He thought about the conversations he'd overheard, the stories of other veterans, and wondered if he'd ever be able to truly open up. The pain was still there, the nightmares still came, and sometimes the temptation to give up was strong. But each morning, he made the decision to return. It was as if something was calling him to keep going. He remembered the sense of relief he felt when he first told his story, and knew he needed to keep digging deep within himself to find healing. The vulnerability he felt was uncomfortable, but it was also a sign that he was emerging from the emotional anesthesia that had kept him trapped. He no longer wanted to live on autopilot, just surviving the day. The other volunteers noticed this effort. Some approached slowly, sharing their own experiences, showing that they too had gone through that period of distrust and fear. This helped Michael realize he wasn't alone. Knowing there were others fighting the same kind of battle created a sense of belonging, and this belonging was one of the elements that began to break the ice around his heart. Behind the scenes of this transformation, there were days of relapse. Sometimes, a simple ambulance siren would send him mentally back to the battlefield, and his body would react with the same tension as before. It was in these moments that Michael most needed to decide between shutting himself down or continuing the process. He chose to face it. That doesn't mean it was easy. There were days when he returned home frustrated, feeling like he wasn't making progress. But each time he chose to return to the project, it was as if he told himself, "I won't let the past win." This persistence shaped a new mindset. Michael began to realize that trust is built little by little, and that living didn't mean forgetting what happened, but finding a way to integrate those experiences and give them new meaning. This was the first great revelation of the journey. There is no healing without the courage to stay even when it hurts. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because this first step paved the way for discoveries that would completely change the way Michael saw the future, revealing that it's possible to build something solid even when the foundation seems shaky. He comments, "I'm taking my first step." Mornings on the project began to take on a different flavor for Michael. The smell of chopped wood, the rhythmic sound of hammers, and the fine dust dancing in the sunlight created a scene that, little by little, replaced the images that had previously dominated his mind. He wasn't just nailing boards, he was redesigning his own life. This transformation stemmed from small decisions: arriving on time, listening carefully, accepting help when his hand shook. Nothing heroic, all real. The construction site became a school of mentality. At first, he simply copied the team leader, repeating every gesture. Later, he took on smaller responsibilities, checking measurements, guiding a volunteer, organizing tools at the end of the day. Soon, Michael was called when a wall was out of plumb. He wasn't the strongest, but he was the most patient. The impact of this extended beyond the project. On the street, neighbors began to see him not as the kid who came back from the war, but as the man who knew how to build. On the project, the team built homes for families who lost everything in the late summer floods in Texas. It was hard to see people starting over from scratch, but it was there that his hands found meaning. He learned more advanced carpentry, installed roofs, and, in one home, built a ramp for a veteran with limited mobility. When the resident walked across the ramp and smiled, Michael felt a warm silence inside, different from the previous emptiness. It was peace. The hidden truth is that serving reorganized his mind. Not everything was linear. A compressor blew and his body reacted automatically. His colleagues surrounded him without fuss, changed tools, and breathed together. These stumbles showed that even in progress, memories still weigh heavily. The difference was in the environment. No one judged. Confidence stopped being a rhetorical statement and became a daily practice. In that support network, Michael relearned how to fall and get up without shame. At home, the family noticed the new rhythm. On Sundays, conversation returned to the table. His father called him to do small jobs in the workshop, as if returning a possession. "Come here, help me calibrate this saw." While they aligned blades, they spoke little, but they understood each other in the silences. Before bed, his mother would run her hand over the cabinet he had repaired and smile as if blessing. These simple, all-American rituals held ground. Home, work, neighborhood, local church, backyard barbecues, and children running around until dusk. The city also found a way to say, "welcome," in a community effort to revitalize the park. Michael led the construction of a small playground. Children ran across the new grass while adults painted benches. A girl asked if he could build castles. He laughed, "I can try a bridge," and he built a wooden bridge between two logs. Spontaneous applause erupted. In a large country like the United States where so many stories are lost, these local gestures created community and purpose. It was during this phase that Michael began to connect dots that had previously seemed loose. He perceived an engineering of transformation: foundation, structure, finishing. The foundation was honesty, admitting what hurt, telling the truth without hiding. The structure was routine: waking up, working, taking care of your mind, cultivating friendships. The finishing touch was attention to detail: listening without interrupting, thanking, fixing what was wrong. This architecture of daily life worked better than any motivational speech. This new mindset pushed him toward a challenge: coordinating a small team of apprentices, including young people who had never held a drill. His patience was tested: mismeasurements, crooked cuts, stripped screws. Instead of exploding, Michael took a deep breath and returned to the beginning. "Let's do it again together." There, he discovered a powerful revelation: teaching also heals. As he explained the process, he narrated to himself the path of reconstruction. And each time an apprentice got the cut right, something in him clicked into place. Patriotic holidays, once dreaded, took on new meaning. On the 4th of July, the team combined a fireworks-free celebration with live music and a community barbecue. Michael stood at the grill, served burgers and corn, and played with the kids. When fireworks burst in the distance, tension set in, but he was surrounded by friends. A hand on the shoulder, a silly work joke, a conversation about baseball. The wave passed. It wasn't an absolute victory. It was an emotional competence built on daily life. One Saturday, the team welcomed the family moving into the newly completed house. The mother held a baby, the oldest son carried a box of books, and the father walked slowly, taking in the details. The boy asked if there was a study corner. Michael showed him the table he'd improvised with salvaged wood and a simple lamp. "Here, your imagination will have space," he said. The boy's smile lit up the room. That scene was worth weeks of effort. It was living proof of the impact. He also created a notebook for personal projects, not just measurements and material lists, but thoughts on discipline and decision-making. He noted the effect of arriving 5 minutes early, the strength of keeping the workbench organized, the power of apologizing when he made a mistake. He named the notebook Behind the Scenes of Reconstruction. Sometimes he read excerpts during meetings, and other veterans began to jot them down too. One of them joked, "I never thought I'd like a journal." Everyone laughed, and a lightheartedness entered the room. Therapy remained his anchor. In some sessions, he revisited difficult memories with new tools. In others, he created plans for bad days, who to call when anxiety hit, what habits to reinforce: water, walking, prayer, playing the guitar on the porch at dusk. This set of small habits protected him when memories persisted. The hidden truth here is simple and demanding. Healing is not an event, it is a system. Over time, Michael began building for himself as well. He renovated his room. He chose light colors, opened the window to the morning light. He put up a shelf with books he'd started reading again, put up family photos, and tucked away in the back of the closet memories he needed to keep but didn't want to face every day. It wasn't an escape. It was emotional design, an architecture of healing. As the house felt more like a home, his mind found rest with less effort. On Veterans Day, the city held a quiet tribute. They called Michael to say a few words. He looked at the flag, at entire families standing, and spoke candidly about mental health and respect. He didn't romanticize it. He didn't dramatize it. He said that courage isn't just about moving forward, sometimes it's about asking for help. Afterward, parents reached out to thank him for naming what they felt at home. He understood, with humility, that his personal journey had a public impact. This stage cemented something essential. The same hands that had known destruction now knew care. Each house delivered, each piece of furniture repaired, each apprentice who makes a clean cut is a small celebration. Small, but powerful. Because this is how life truly begins again, in repeated gestures, with attention, respect, and patience for oneself and others. And when routine is built on this foundation, the future ceases to be a threat and becomes a possibility. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because behind each work are intimate choices that change the course of Michael's life and can point to practical paths for many families here in the United States who are also trying to rebuild what was broken inside. Write in the comments, hands that heal. Michael's hands felt different. For years they had been trained to pull triggers, disassemble and assemble weapons in the dark, carry heavy equipment, and react with precision to any threat. Now, they held wood, used planes, screwed doors, and painted walls. The contrast was so stark that he sometimes stopped for a moment and found himself thinking about everything those same hands had done. It was as if, by building something new, he was rebuilding himself from within. Each hammer stroke held symbolic meaning. Each nail driven in was like a stitch closing an invisible wound. And little by little, he began to realize that it wasn't just someone's home being built there, it was also his own identity. The routine at the construction site took on an almost spiritual meaning. Michael would arrive early, take a deep breath as he smelled the wood and cement, and silently give thanks for another day. It was hard, tiring work, but it brought his body and mind into alignment. He returned home exhausted, but with the feeling that this exhaustion was healing him. It wasn't the mental exhaustion of war, it was a weariness that brought peace. On weekends, he began volunteering on other initiatives, such as building accessibility ramps in public buildings, something he knew would help wounded veterans move around better. This decision to become increasingly involved shaped his mindset toward something greater. Survival wasn't enough. He needed to leave a legacy. On one project, Michael was tasked with building a room for a child who had lost his father in an accident. He dedicated himself especially, choosing the color of the walls, building extra shelves for his toys and leaving a small note hidden in the drawer. Your home was built with hope. When the family arrived to see the finished house, the boy ran down the hallway and hugged Michael without saying a word. It was then that he felt a lump in his throat and realized that his work had gone beyond simply building walls. It was an act of restoring lives. Over time, his name began to circulate in the community. People called to ask for help with simple repairs, and he always found time to contribute. An elderly woman called him to fix her gate. When he finished, she brought a piece of apple pie and told stories of her husband's time serving in World War II. This exchange of experiences made Michael feel connected to a lineage of men and women who, somehow, always found ways to rebuild after pain. The hidden truth he discovered in this process was clear. When you help someone rebuild, you rebuild yourself. It wasn't long before Michael's work began to inspire other veterans. Some arrived with blank stares, shoulders slumped, and he welcomed them as he had once been welcomed. No pressure, just presence. Sometimes, simply handing someone a tool was enough to start a conversation. There was a quiet power in seeing another man, who understood the same pain, decide to pick up a hammer and take the first step. Soon, these volunteers formed a cohesive team, almost a new fraternity, where each had their place and role. The impact grew. The city government realized the project's social reach and began supporting it, providing materials and publicizing the initiatives. Local schools began inviting Michael to give talks on resilience, decision-making, and purpose. He never saw himself as a public speaker, but he began speaking simply, recounting his own journey. It was impressive to see teenagers paying attention, some even with tears in their eyes, as they heard how someone can lose themselves and find themselves again. He spoke about mindset, about not letting the worst days define your entire life, about how small choices, repeated daily, have the power to turn an entire story upside down. One of the most memorable moments happened on Veterans Day, when Michael was invited to speak in the city's main square. He took the stage with slightly shaky hands but a firm voice. He spoke about what it meant to him to exchange the weight of a gun for the weight of a beam, to transform destruction into something welcoming. At the end, he received a standing ovation. There were parents with children in their arms, veterans wearing berets, curious young people. It was a scene he would never forget, not because of the recognition, but because he felt his pain had been transformed into something that touched other lives. Michael's hands, which once bore only memories of destruction, now visibly held hope. He said that every callus, every scratch was a mark of rebuilding, and this journey made him realize he was more alive than ever. Looking back, he saw a path full of scars, but looking forward, he saw opportunities to continue building. It was as if the world had taken on new colors, as if the gray of war had finally given way to the blue of a peaceful sky. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because what follows shows how this transformative movement didn't stop there, but began to create a domino effect, impacting families, young people, and other veterans who began to see new possibilities for their own lives. Comment there. Steady hands to start over. Michael realized that his life was no longer just about surviving the days, but about what he could share with others. The man who, for so long, believed there was no way out, was now standing tall, his heart open, transforming everything he'd learned into something that inspired others. His message wasn't a rehearsed speech, but a reflection of his own scarred skin, of a soul that had hit rock bottom and yet found a ladder to climb back up. Each word carried the authority of someone who truly lived what he said. When he spoke of hope, it wasn't a theoretical hope, but the hope born one dark night sitting on the living room floor, when he thought he couldn't take it anymore. That memory became the driving force behind his voice. He told people that transformation begins the moment you decide you no longer want to live as you did before. And it was impossible to hear this without feeling a chill, because it felt like he was speaking directly to the person there. Fathers whose sons were serving in the Middle East came to him with teary eyes, asking how they could prepare their homes to welcome them back. Mothers who lost sleep fearing what war might do to their children heard from Michael something no one else dared to say, that the hardest battle begins when the uniform is rolled up and life must go on. This message spread. The local school gymnasium was packed the first time Michael was invited to speak. He took the stage, looked out over the rows of restless teenagers and took a deep breath. He told his story without unnecessary filters, without trying to be a hero. He spoke of the days he isolated himself, of the nightmares that left him waking up sweaty, of the feeling of not fitting in anywhere. And then he spoke of his first day on the project, of how a simple hammer restored meaning to his hands. When he finished, the silence in the room was so deep that everyone could hear their breathing. Then came the applause, and some young people approached later to say that his story had given them the courage to ask for help with their own problems. Each time Michael shared his journey, the hidden truth he had discovered became clearer. Pain doesn't have to be the end point. He said that pain is like wet cement. At first it seems chaotic and shapeless, but if worked with patience, it can become the solid foundation for something new. This metaphor became famous among the project's volunteers, who began calling him the architect of hope. He laughed at this nickname, but deep down he knew there was some truth to it. People around him began to change. A young volunteer who had never talked about his anxiety began to open his heart after hearing Michael tell of his first therapy session. Another veteran who had abandoned his family decided to try to reconnect with his children. It was as if Michael's journey had blazed a trail through the woods for others to follow. The impact wasn't just on the houses built, but on what was happening inside people. This message also began to resonate in churches, community gatherings, and neighborhood dinners. Little by little, Michael became a voice of balance in a world full of noise. He reminded people that rebuilding isn't about erasing the past. It's about learning to live with it in a way that doesn't rob us of the future. This idea led men and women to look at each other with more compassion, understanding that everyone carries invisible battles. He also shared something he learned in therapy, that healing isn't a straight line. There will be setbacks, there will be days when everything seems to be back to square one, but that doesn't mean you're not making progress. This honesty resonated deeply, because many people believe that if they fail once, they have to give up. Michael showed that it's just the opposite, that it's on the hardest days that courage is tested and strengthened. And perhaps most powerful of all was seeing how this message impacted young people. A 15-year-old boy wrote to Michael saying that, after hearing his story, he decided to stay in school and seek help to deal with his anger. This kind of feedback moved Michael deeply. It was proof that his scars had become seeds. Each story of transformation that emerged was like another brick in the great work he was building, a work that was no longer made of wood and cement, but of touched lives. What Michael taught wasn't a miracle manual. It was a realistic path. He spoke of decisions, discipline, and courage to face one's own darkness. He said that just as in a construction project, you need to clear the ground before building something new. And clearing the ground in life can mean forgiving, asking for forgiveness, starting over, leaving behind what no longer serves. This clarity inspired listeners to look at their own lives and ask themselves, what foundation am I building? Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because what follows is the result of this message spreading like wildfire, touching not only veterans but entire families, schools, and even local businesses that have come to support the rebuilding movement started by Michael. Write in the comments. This story gave me strength. When Michael realized everything he had experienced and where he was now, he felt a deep need to share more than just his own story. He wanted others to have the chance to experience this transformation too. It was as if every brick he laid, every volunteer he inspired, every word he spoke in a lecture was part of something bigger, a call for others to rise up. He understood that this message wasn't just his. It was a universal truth. Even after the deepest pain, it's still possible to build something beautiful. It's still possible to start over. That's why this kind of story needs to be told. Because there's someone, somewhere, who's going through the same silence Michael did. Someone who looks at their past and thinks there's no way out. Maybe that person is right there, watching now, and needs to hear that there is a way. That no matter how heavy you carry, there's a way to transform it all into something meaningful. Maybe you know someone who needs this message. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me which part of the story resonated with you the most, or if there's anyone who came to mind while listening to this story. When you comment, you create a space for exchange, where others going through difficult times can feel less alone. This is the power of community, turning pain into collective strength. Your comment can be the spark that helps someone take the first step. And when you like, you help this story reach further, reaching people who may be at rock bottom today. It's a simple gesture, but it makes a difference, and if you want to continue following inspiring stories of overcoming, transformation, and new beginnings, just click to subscribe. Every time you join this movement, you help keep this wave of hope alive. Here, each video is an invitation to reflect, to grow, and to remember that no one needs to walk alone. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because Michael's journey doesn't end here. There are revelations that show how what he experienced created a ripple effect that transformed families, strengthened community bonds, and changed the fate of young people who were on the verge of giving up. He comments, "Stories like this give me hope. If you've made it this far, it's because this story spoke to you in some way. So leave a simple sentence in the comments to let me know you stuck with me until the end. It could be something like, 'This message was for me,' or any word that sums up your feelings. I read everything and enjoy hearing how each story impacts those on the other side. If this video made you reflect, please leave a like, as it helps keep this space alive and allows more people to find this type of content that brings hope and strength to start over. And if you want to continue following stories like this, subscribe to the channel. That way you won't miss any of the next chapters of this journey. There's a video here that complements this topic and delves even deeper into this conversation. Click through and stay with me there, because there's so much more for us to experience and learn together.